Hi everyone, I'm Rincey and this is Rincey Reads. Today I am going to be doing my March reading wrap up. This will be relatively quick because I have 4 books to talk about. The last one, I'll talk about it in more detail, but I'm like, should I count that as a book that I read? But kind of. But also I'm like getting over a cold, so like talking for a long period of time will probably bother me. But yeah, March was really busy for me in terms of like things happening. Like I feel like I know so many people who have March birthdays, and so I was spending lots of time with my family and friends and whatnot, and so didn't do as much reading, which is fine. It happens. That's life. But there are some good books that I read this month, and really that's all that matters. So the first book that I am going to talk about briefly is A Girl is a Body of Water by Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi. And this is the book that was the inaugural Chunky Chapter Book Club pick, which is the Patreon book club that I run. And so I'm not going to talk about it too much here because I'm doing a live show for it on Monday for my Patreons. And so I'm going to be like going into details there and talking about it with them. And so if you're interested in checking out the live show, my Patreon is linked down below. It's a book club where we try to pick up books that are 500 pages or longer, and we only do one every other month because in order to give ourselves breaks. This is a historical fiction book that takes place in Uganda. You are following this girl named Carabo, and when the story starts, she's 12 years old, and she is, just starting to come of age, becoming more aware of the things that are happening around her. She doesn't feel like she falls into like the stereotypes of what a girl should be or what she should be doing and things like that. She's also really into trying to figure out like who her mother is and where she is, because her mother hasn't been a part of her life. She lives with her grandparents. Even her dad isn't around very much, and so she's like really into trying to figure out who her mom is. And so over the course of this book, you follow Carabo as she grows up and kind of faces the world around her. This book doesn't have like a super clear like plot thread. It's really just like a coming of age story as you're following this young girl growing up in Uganda, sort of recognizing the expectations that are placed upon her because of who her family is and the people that she belongs to and things like that, like growing up with her grandparents who have a prominent place in this area, but also just like the general societal Ugandan like typical female roles that are expected of young girls and women and things like that, and what she does and doesn't want with her life and stuff like that. So yeah, like I said, 3-star reading experience for me, partially just because the writing style itself was a little bit of a hindrance for me. Like I never really felt like I could sink into this book. And this book is broken up into parts, and so you do like jump around in time a little bit, but I enjoyed the story overall because of those discussions of like girlhood and womanhood and, the expectations placed on women and things like that, and seeing sort of how certain things are expected of women in this culture, and also seeing like what it's like growing up in Uganda and stuff like that. So yeah, I did enjoy this book. I just didn't fully love it, but I'm really excited to talk about this one with my book club patrons because I feel like there's lots of things that happen in this book that are worth talking about. The next book I have to talk about is The Mermaid by Christina Henry. This is like a historical fantasy book, basically, that's kind of a retelling, but also kind of not. In this story, you are following this mermaid who falls in love with a man on land and ends up, joining the humans on land. But things sort of happen, and then eventually she ends up joining P.T. Barnum's circus. And so she's the type of mermaid where when she's on land, she has legs, but then when she jumps into the water, I think it's specifically seawater, her like tail grows and things like that, and she becomes more of a mermaid. And so you're following this mermaid named Amelia, and you see sort of like how she adjusts to living on land and sort of the complications of that, and her sort of joining this circus and what that means for her and things like that, or joining this museum, it's not a circus, and what that entails and what that requires of her and sort of the complications with that. This is a relatively short book. This is also a relatively slow-paced book. This was also a 3-star reading experience for me. I read a number of Christina Henry's books, and so she always has this sort of like fairy tale or classic story retelling. Like she's done a Peter Pan one and a Little Red Riding Hood one and things like that, and she always has these little twists to them. And so it was interesting because like the first part of the story feels like the Little Mermaid story, but then it like changes completely. And I always like wonder with things like this where they use like actual historical figures like P.T. Barnum, like why that choice was made, because like for me there's like always like this disconnect or dissonance that happens because Christina Henry isn't actually telling the story of things that happened to P.T. Barnum. Like she pull little details here and there, and she addresses that in like an author's note at the end of the story. But this isn't like a historical fiction story about P.T. Barnum even really. It's like she made P.T. Barnum into the character she needed to be in order to make this story work. Or to tell the story that she wanted to tell. But then it's just like, why are you using P.T. Barnum? You could just like have made up a different character name. This is also way slower paced than I expected it to be. It takes like a really, really long time before like the museum opens with the mermaid and all this stuff. And it feels like there are some plot points that happen in here that go really quickly, especially towards the end of the book. And so yeah, it wasn't like my favorite Christina Henry book. Like, I'm glad that I read it, but it's definitely not her best. There is some interesting stuff that also happens in this book in terms of like the roles of women and like expectations, and also kind of a discussion about like celebrity and things like that, and sort of these ways that crowds become obsessed with people. But I think if you go into this book wanting a Little Mermaid retelling, you're not going to be very excited. I think if you just want like a historical fantasy book that features mermaids, or a mermaid, I suppose, then this is worth picking up. So yeah, it's a weird like sort of mesh of stories that doesn't completely make sense to me. All right, the next book I have to talk about is Yinka, Where Is Your Husband by Lizzie, Damilola, Blackburn. This is a pretty new contemporary fiction book. It's kind of like a rom-com book. In this story, you are following Yinka, who is a British Nigerian woman. She's in her 30s. She is Oxford educated. She has this really good job working at this investment firm, but no one is really willing to like acknowledge how great those things are, because they all just focus on her singleness, especially like her mom and her aunts and things like that. And so the story begins with Yinka at her younger sister's baby shower. And so her mom is like saying a prayer and things like that. And then when they go to pray for Yinka, I think her aunt actually is the one who prays for Yinka. And she basically just prays like for God to provide a husband for Yinka. You know, she obviously gets really upset about things like that. But then she finds out that her cousin Rachel has just gotten engaged and is going to get married later this year. And so she basically hatches this plan to try to get a date for her cousin's wedding. And so this story just follows her over the course of a year, while not just that, but all other things happen in her life as well. She kind of has to figure out like her role and what her identity is and things like that. But she like makes this spreadsheet with a plan of how she's going to go on dates and find guys to talk to and stuff like that. But she also has like her own personal things that she's going through. Like she's self-conscious about the way that she looks because she's darker skinned and she cut off all her hair and things like that. And so she doesn't fall into, you know, stereotypes of like a beautiful black woman, quote unquote, you know, the stereotypes. But you also get to see like her friendship with her sisters and her cousins and her friend that ends up moving in with her and things like that. And so it's kind of just like this really fun rom-com. I enjoyed my experience reading this so much. I read this super quickly, like within 2 days. I think part of the reason why I enjoyed this so much, actually I know part of the reason why I enjoyed this so much is because I found this to be an extremely relatable book. You know, I've had people in my life pray for me to find a husband. I've had plans about trying to meet guys and things like that, and trying to like hype myself up into going on dates when I felt like I didn't really want to, being in my 30s and not married yet, things like that. Very relatable. And there's just like so much stuff that Yinka says or her family says or stuff like that that's literally things that I've heard or thought or, you know, said myself and things like that. It's just, for me, a very, very relatable book. It was also just like really, really fun. Again, if you are someone who enjoys rom-coms, I feel like you would really enjoy this. This would make a really fun like movie or like mini series following Yinka over the course of her adventures. But it does have like a little bit of depth to it. Like it's not all fun and games. There's a lot of stuff that Yinka goes through over the course of this book that she has to deal with. It talks about things like counseling and therapy and stuff like that. And I really, really appreciated the book for that. It's grounded, but it's still like fun and lighthearted. So yeah, if you are someone who's in the mood for like a rom-com type of book, I definitely recommend picking this one up. Oh, also, I saw this recommended as like a book to pick up if you enjoy books like Bridget Jones's Diary, which I think is a really accurate comp. Okay, and the final book I'm going to talk about very briefly is, very hilariously, A Practical Wedding by Meg Keene. So Meg Keene created this website called apracticalwedding.com. So she has now created a book I think the book was originally published in 2011. She like republished it, updated in 2019. She also has a planner that she's put out. And I checked out both the book and the planner from the library. But I like don't know if I should fully count this book. Like I basically read it, but there are significant parts of it that I just skimmed through because it wasn't practical for me. But overall, I really enjoyed this book. I would say that if you're someone who is planning a wedding and really has no idea where to start, and also you're like want to know like the real practical, like, what do I need to do in order to get a wedding done? This is a really great guide, but it also is really good because it talks about things like what are considered like traditional things you should do at a wedding, American weddings, Western weddings, and how like those things haven't always been traditional. And she sort of goes through like the history of like some of the traditions that we now have as part of Western weddings. She talks about things like what's the true purpose of your engagement, whether or not you should DIY things for your wedding in order to save money. She even has like an entire section that's like, here are different like budgets and like how that money was spent for different types of weddings, because like depending on your style of wedding, like if you have it at a banquet hall, or if you have it at a restaurant, or if you have it at a park or like a church hall or something like that, those costs are going to vary significantly. And so you can like break it down in like a million different ways, and it could be overwhelming. So this was a very useful guide. I'm really glad that I read it because there were like specific sections in here that I like took pictures of, sent to my partner, or because either he needed to read it or I was like, oh, I'm really being called out here in this section about the way that I think about weddings and stuff like that, and sort of like breaking maybe some of the stuff that you like internalize without realizing that you've internalized it. And so yeah, I feel like if you are like me and you are just like an extremely practical person, weddings are a lot and can be overwhelming. And so I found this to be a really useful guide. And even it might even come down to like when you go through all of this, you realize that, hey, you want to elope or whatever, you know, and that's fine too. And she talks about that as well. So it was really useful. She does acknowledge that like point of view that she's taking from all of this is from an American point of view, but also from like a white and hetero point of view, and how that, you know, narrows the scope quite a bit, and how like if you don't fall into those categories, the wedding industry is like can be even worse or even more difficult to deal with. And so I appreciated that she acknowledged that. I will say like specifically the wedding planner has a couple of exercises at the beginning of the book that I found to be really useful. Ones where you and your partner basically like rank different categories. And so she lists like all of these different things that can go into a wedding, and you and your partner are supposed to like rank them separately so you can see like what actually matters to you and what doesn't. You know, she recommends coming up with like a mission statement for your wedding and things like that, so that way like when you get into the thick of it, you have this mission statement to like center you and to remind you of like what the purpose is, so you can be like, you know what, I don't give enough about chairs. Have them look however they look. You know, you need those reminders. So yeah, I would say like if you're never planning on getting married, or if you're not like in a relationship now, you know, don't pick up this book. But I would say like if you are planning on getting married in the United States, this was really, really useful. So yeah, that's everything I have for you all for this video. Let me know down in the comments below if you've read any of the books that I talked about here today, or if you have any questions about any of the books that I talked about here today, feel free to leave that down in the comment section as well. So yeah, that's all I have for now, and thanks for watching.